And now, here's your host of Shaping Success, Wes Tankersley.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to Shaping Success. I am your host, Wes Tankersley. Today, we have a great guest for you. Before we get to that, if you can please help me to grow the show, please like, share, review, subscribe, all those things to help, get this out there, because without you, I can't make it go. If you would like to join the Patreon for as little as $4 a month, you can do that. There's some bonus coverage. Today's guest has decided that he would stay and hang after, which is what I always ask, and make sure that they can, so we can have a little behind the scenes conversation, and a lot of good things happen during that. So join that Patreon. Links in the show notes. If you're looking for some Shaping Success gear, sticker, things like that, hit me up. Let me know. We'll get them going. All that can be found at westankersley.com. Today's guest is Tyler Hoesgen. He's a communication coach and an author, and we're going to get him here right now. Ty, thanks for hanging out and reaching out, man.
Thanks, Wes. Absolute pleasure to be here.
It's, a lot of times I get guests who kind of reach out, and I always like it when it's the person themselves, because it seems like you get a lot of these PR people who are like, so-and-so will be great on your show. And I don't really think that those PR people like really listen or watch or kind of know what's going on with my podcast. So it's nice when I know that you've checked it out. So thanks for reaching out, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Big fan. I definitely learned a lot listening to the show. So now it's pretty cool for me to be on this end, sharing value with some of the other listeners.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit beforehand, but I've had a couple of, I feel like it's kind of a communication type people coming on and talking about how like you can use words as kind of like weapons, and like they can be a good weapon or they can be a bad weapon. We talked a little bit about body language beforehand, which is a big thing. I think that a lot of people don't understand that their body language gives off. I see it with athletes a lot. Can you kind of just tell people a little bit what you do and how you help coach people?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do so. So I'm a communication coach, and I primarily help professionals speak with more confidence, clarity, and charisma. So the whole goal there is to help people get more respect, advance their careers, have deeper relationships, and ultimately make more money, right? So the body language is a big part of that. The words are a big part of that. The way we use our voice is a big part of that. So there's definitely a lot of key pieces to the puzzle when it comes to communication, and happy to dive into those today. We can definitely do a full masterclass for the audience.
Yeah. I think that one of the things before we do get to that, because I'd love to just kind of talk about that a little bit, but is communication seems like a very big thing right now. Like it's a lost art. I was a teacher for, 4 or 5 years, and I had to learn how to talk in front of these 30 little kids. Not little, I mean, at last time it was high school. So they're a little bit older. They kind of understand a little bit more, but they don't know how to effectively communicate. I mean, they've got their phone, they text, they email, they don't know how. What I like is like you can get inflection in a voice when you have a conversation, or you can see the body language and you can understand where they're coming from. Because someone like me, I always had the kids tell me, hey, you're very stern. But then when they start to know who I am and how I communicate, then they get a little bit more in tune to that. And it's not quite as bad as what they think.
I completely agree with you. It is definitely becoming a lost art. And a lot of these skills, I feel, are going extinct.
Right.
And a lot of it is because of our phones, the way that we communicate primarily virtually, whether it's over a computer, we're sending a message, we're sending an email. Video calls have become very prominent. And so this is kind of the closest that a lot of us get to the face-to-face interactions now. But if we're not particularly intentional in learning how to communicate better, if we're left just to our natural lifestyle, which is so digitally focused, the communication skills are going to be very, very poor for the average person unless they actually take the time to listen to a podcast like this, or practice, analyze themselves, work with a coach. So I'm glad that you said that, because particularly now with AI going to be doing a lot of our writing, a lot of our creation, our messages. I know multiple professionals that don't even write a lot of their own emails now. So it just goes to show how important being able to communicate well when you actually have an interaction with someone will be, because that human connection is something that I don't believe will ever really be replaced.
Yeah, and it's funny because like we were talking about like that way of communicating. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day talking about like dating. I've been married for 23 years, so I don't have to. I'm not planning on getting divorced, and I could just imagine like trying to go into a dating pool nowadays and not being able to actually like physically talk to the person first to kind of get to know who they are, or basing your decision off a picture or a height or whatever. And social media is a killer, right? Because all you see is the best version of this person. You don't really know who you're actually interacting with until you get face to face.
For sure. It's a really interesting time to be a person in the dating world right now. Really, those decisions that used to be made on meeting someone in person, what's the energy like? Do we have a connection here? Those initial decisions are all being made, like you said, based on a picture, right, based on some statistics, based on some potentially made up interests that they put on the profile. And so, yeah, it's a very fascinating dating marketplace out there right now, because it's also globalized to where, think back to our parents or even our grandparents, they had options that were in their town or in their city. Right. We meet someone, let's maybe ask them out on a date. And we got to do it that day because we may not ever see them again,
right,
depending on the size of the city. So now, if you're a good-looking person, you could be reached out to people from this country or that country or this city or that city. And so it's a totally different world. I'm not sure if it's necessarily a good thing, but if you truly care again about that human connection, I still think just meeting people in person the old-fashioned way, if you're at an event, introducing yourself, just look them in the eyes. Right. Introduce yourself, shake their hand. Like those simple things really make a big difference. And I think a lot of time is wasted doing the scrolling, looking at the pictures. Because if you meet someone, a lot of it is, does the energy match? Do we have that vibe, bit of a connection? And so if you do all this scrolling, looking at these pictures, all this messaging before you actually meet someone, there's just so much time that could be spent in a better way if you just meet them sooner or right, meet in person.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating, just thinking through those things, and in talking about, because you said it's it's a communication thing. Can you tell us what fascinated with you? What got you into this? Because you're doing this for a business. You're helping people learn how to communicate effectively. Why that? What drove you to that?
Excellent question. So it came from turning what I call a mess into a message. So growing up, I was very much the stereotypical shy, awkward, quiet kid. I actually grew up on a farm near a very small town. The closest town was 800 people. So now I live in Toronto, biggest city in Canada. I think it's like fourth or fifth highest population in North America. So kind of the opposite of a small farm near a town of 800 people. But I actually liked that because I preferred avoiding people in my natural state growing up.
Right.
And so you can kind of get through, elementary school, high school, maybe a couple friends, university. It's a lot of tests, exams, papers. So you can get through life, not having the best life, but you can get through life up until a certain point. And for me, that point was when I graduated university, college, and then entered the professional world. So the only job I could get out of school was selling life insurance.
Oh, man.
So, Wes, at this point, I'm pretty nervous to ask someone about their weekend, just really casually.
Uh-huh.
And now my job, my income, is based on talking to people about death, disease, disability. Let's talk about what's going to happen if something terrible comes up unexpectedly. So pretty awkward conversations to have, even if you're a great communicator.
Yeah.
So I was shown very quickly how much I needed to improve with my communication, with my people skills. And it actually got to a point where I hit a pretty dark stage where I was just anxious all the time, nervous, really failing at my job, trouble sleeping. And so it was basically an obsession that sparked almost out of necessity.
Yeah.
So learning about all the different aspects of communication, there weren't really coaches back then, right? This is over a decade ago now. So
Right.
coaches were only for sports,
Mm-hmm.
just sports. There's no communication coach that even existed at that point. So I really just obsessed over reading the books, taking the courses, trying to Google articles, practice, experiment all on my own. So fortunately, as you know, if you put enough time and effort into anything over a long enough period, you're going to see results. You're going to make progress.
It's
So for
crazy
me-
because I think that just listening to you break this down, because I kind of went through this myself as well. Because, I've had a couple careers, and my first career was kind of sales. It was a little bit sales and like having to talk to people. But I did, I worked at a tire store. So I'm selling tires, I'm selling wheels, I'm selling all that stuff to keep a car going. And I didn't really dive into what it took to actually make that happen until after I went to college, went back, became an educator, and then quit that, and then went back into sales again. Because you talking about sitting on a farm and not being able to, you're outside, you're not, if you got animals or if you're in the middle of nowhere, there's no one to communicate with, like you said. But you get into sales, you walked right into something where you have to communicate every single day. And I want to talk a little bit about like some of the tools that you used to get there, because you said books was one thing. You said taking courses was another thing, Googling things, because I feel like as a salesperson, we're always trying to close better. We're always trying to make more money. We're always trying to get as much business as we can. And you can't ever stop learning the best way to communicate with a customer, because if you do, then it's going to stall. It's not going to go anywhere.
100%. And it's funny, when I was first learning about this type of thing, the quality of knowledge that was out there is nowhere near what it is now. Like today, we have all these podcasts like this one.
Yep.
We have all these entertaining videos, people on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, like all these pretty stimulating ways of learning. But back then, a lot of the communication content was just so dry.
Right.
It's like a 60-year-old talking about how you need to speak politely to others.
Right.
And I'm like, if I wasn't struggling so much, I probably would have just given up.
Uh-huh.
Because the quality of the content for, a kid in his early 20s was just so terrible.
Right.
And so that's actually one of the reasons that I got into the business as well, was because I wanted to, make videos, and I have a book out, and just different ways of presenting the content so that it's interesting enough that, so whether they're in their early 20s or maybe 30s, 40s, but they're learning about this or want to improve, it's not so hard to focus. It's actually kind of enjoyable to learn and put some of these
Right. That's the interesting thing. Like I've read a bunch of different, I listened to them. So here's one thing that's a little different, right? Like we used to have to crack that book and read it. And it would take so much time, and it just wasn't like, for me, it was like, I don't have this time. You can make the time. It's not like you can't make it, but like to be able to put it on Audible and listen to it while I drive around in between sales calls and just gaining knowledge as I go has been so crazy. But then you get to actually, I don't know is your book on audio?
It is, yes.
Okay. And do you read it yourself? Or do
I
you
actually hired a narrator to do it.
Okay.
And it's funny, actually, when I first published the book, everyone said, Ty, you need to read it yourself. You need to. But when I actually looked into it, the amount of equipment I'd have to get, people, it's actually a pretty intricate process. Right. If you're a professional narrator, they have these little rooms with like padding on the walls so that the sound doesn't bounce off, and all these pretty like complicated setups just to sound perfect. Right. And I remember to hire someone, it was really reasonable, and it was kind of an interesting process when you post it's kind of like posting a job offer for a narrator. It was so cool. There was, I think, like 200 people that auditioned. So you got to hear all these different voices reading little snippets. And so the guy I picked has a nice, cool, deep voice, a little deeper than mine.
And that's,
it needs to be.
That's what you have to do. You have to have someone, like, if you're not going to read it yourself, you have to have someone who is really going to draw them in. Because like listening to, I don't know if you've read the 10X rule, but listening to Grant Cardone read that out loud versus reading it in the pages, because I have both versions, he gets you jacked up. He gets you excited. He wants, he's like, this is it. This is what you're doing. Like it's, I don't know. Listening to it for me motivates me more than reading it,
Especially with Grant, he's got that voice that just really hypes you up, gets you fired up. Just reading it, I find because I have a couple of paper versions of his books too.
Uh-huh.
Even when I read the paper versions, I still read it in his voice,
Yeah.
which makes it more fun. But if it was just the words, I mean, a lot of the stuff is kind of simple until he actually gets to the more tangible. But a lot of it is just pretty inspirational, motivational, especially at the beginning of the book. So if you're just reading that, you'd think, yeah, all right. But because it's him, it's 10 times better.
Yeah, and you get those options too. Like and what I like is that you've written a book, right? And it may be some of the same tools that other people use, but you are a different individual and it helped you in a different way. So being able to articulate that to other people that, maybe you're dyslexic, or maybe you're colorblind, or maybe like there's all these things that can be a barrier to you, but this person's been through that and they're going to show you how they work through it.
Yeah, 100%. That's the nice thing about today's world too, is that we have access to share our personality along with a lot of these tools. I don't think there's other communication books that talk about, for example, listening skills. They talk about and how people's minds often get distracted.
Right.
And I talk about our minds wandering to things like what we're going to have for dinner, or if there's a 50-50 chance we're in a simulation. I don't think that's in any other communication book. Right. That's something I often think about. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. But yeah, just being able to sprinkle in different thoughts and ideas throughout your content, throughout your book, and even what you do. People can hear your voice. If they're watching the video clips, they can see your mannerisms. You sometimes sprinkle in little witty parts too, which is always fun. So yeah, right. It's a great time to be able to do this type of thing.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about what you do. Like if you were going to coach someone, what's the process like? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So typically I'll do a call with them first just to really learn about the classic stuff, the goals, the challenges, really a deep understanding of what exactly they're struggling with. Why are they struggling with it? Why is it important? And then going into the process in terms of how they can make progress the fastest. So that's the one thing that drew me to being a coach, was that I spent just so many years trial and error, practice, experimentation. So right now I'm definitely all about just people making progress as quickly as possible, because I've worked with hundreds of people now. I've been a coach for many years. There are ways to do things really quickly. Obviously, you still have to put in the work.
Right.
But the cool thing about communication is that you're already having all these interactions throughout your day, most people. So there's lots of opportunities to practice. So after we do that initial first call, just to figure that part out, it's a bit customized depending on the person. A lot of what I do is one-on-one coaching with people. So, for example, a big thing for a lot of people is speaking clearly, speaking concisely. They find that they ramble a lot, or they're kind of getting off topic, especially in those important situations, talking to their boss, talking to a prospect, potential client. And so, for example, a big lesson that we teach early on is frameworks and basically structures for how do we organize these thoughts, organize these ideas, so you have something to work within to help you speak more concisely, not ramble on for 10 minutes and have people wondering what the heck you're talking about, but being able to be super clear, short, powerful, stuff like that.
We've all been in those work meetings where it's just like, can we get to the point already? This could have been covered in it. Like you see that meme all the time. This could have been covered in an email. It's like, do we really need to do this? It's funny though, because I feel like, I like the fact that you're talking about like getting to the point, getting the fastest result possible, because I think that we're all result driven. I've been doing this podcast for 4 years and I'm always chasing that result, trying to get more downloads, more views, all those things. And I watch like in my day job, how we're so easy to give up very quickly. So like we want results with advertising, with marketing, with anything. Like you want it super quick. But the reality of the situation is, even though you can get results quickly, you have to continue to practice that. And I think that a lot of people get lost on that. Like if it doesn't happen right now, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. You have to continue to work on it, right?
100%. And a lot of these things, whether it's learning communication or learning any other new skill, you're truly rewiring your brain, right? You're forming all these new neural connections in the brain. If you've been speaking a certain way your whole life, would you expect to just speak an entirely new, different way after one day of practice? Probably not.
It's pretty crazy because we think about, right, like that 10,000 hour rule. If you've spent 10,000 hours acting one way, you got to unwind that. You got to undo it, right?
Yeah, and that's where the intention definitely comes in. I don't want to scare anyone off from learning about communication. It doesn't take 10,000 hours.
No, right.
which is great. But definitely it does take effort, and it does take intention. I say intention as one of the key words because when we talk about practice, again, a lot of my best clients actually don't put in a ton of time outside of their work, outside of the normal everyday situations that they're having. But they are intentional to practice the things that we're learning during all of those conversations. So lots of people, they'll have, a couple Zoom calls a day. They'll talk to this person here, even conversations with friends, with a partner, with family. Those are all situations. You can practice the things that you learn without actually having to set aside, okay, I need to do an hour a day of communication practice.
Right.
I don't want to say don't practice, but truly a lot of my clients that see the best results don't actually put in a lot of extra time. They just practice a lot during their everyday.
Yeah. So like when you get in front of someone, you actually use that skill instead of just like hiding in the corner. It's not like it's something that you have to like actively seek out and go like, I have a friend who does Toastmasters, practices her speech all the time. And I'm like, I'm so proud of you because you're learning how to do that. But you can, it doesn't have to be, and I think that's what you're getting at. It's not like you have to sit there and just like practice in the mirror all day, right? You can do it just in your everyday interaction and become a better speaker.
Absolutely. And so I believe that's one of the cool parts about communication is, unlike you're sitting down to learn the piano or the guitar or even something like working out, right? You have to be in a particular place generally, put on your shoes, your workout clothes. But communication, if you're getting groceries, if you're talking to your mom on the phone,
right?
Small talk with a coworker, all the way up to an important meeting with your boss, job interview. All of these things are opportunities. And so, yeah, the time commitment isn't actually as much as a lot of people would think. So I hope that encourages some people to learn a bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's great because I think, like you said, like it's not like we're going to college to learn how to do this. This is something that we could actively do all day, every day, with any interaction that you have. Unfortunately, the sad thing is that a lot of people are not getting this opportunity anymore, right? Like they're working from home on a phone or working on a screen, and they're not getting out to communicate. So I think that's probably a little bit tougher in some of the COVID problems that we had, where it's like we don't want you being around people, right?
Absolutely right. And I hope most people have moved on from that and are definitely back in the outside world. Hopefully, if you're not, get outside.
Yes.
But that's where the video calls really absolutely took off. And I had to shift most of my focus from, I did a lot of in-person interaction training to video call training. And so now I have just oodles and oodles of video call tips and trainings that I'll do for people, because a lot of my clients, they barely have in-person interactions for their professional jobs.
Right.
And they're still going out into the world, which is good. But when it comes to at work, most of what they do is on video. So yeah, that's definitely a whole different area where we almost want to replicate a face-to-face interaction over video as much as possible.
Well, it's a tough thing too, because as I'm sitting here, I like constantly have to remind myself to look at the camera, or it looks like I'm looking down or not paying attention if you're looking at me. So it's a weird thing to learn, right?
It really is. I'm glad you mentioned that. So looking at the camera, there's actually a lot of science behind this. It's the real life equivalent of making eye contact. Right. So our brain releases a chemical called oxytocin, which is that feel good, that connection chemical when we make eye contact with someone. So by me looking at the camera right now, it looks like I'm looking at you.
Right.
This would be the equivalent.
You do a really good job, I will tell you that, because I'm like sitting here and I'm like, because I'm always, what's that? Does this look like I'm looking up? What do we got? Because my camera's above, right? So it's not like right in front of me.
It's so funny because this is something that so many people do, is they just look down most of the time, lower on the screen or middle of the screen. Think about if you're in person, that would kind of be like looking at their torso or their shoulders or somewhere that isn't their face. And imagine just looking down and not looking someone in the eyes. Sometimes we do this for an entire call. I see this all the time. Yeah. People that just aren't aware of where to look. Right. Especially when you yourself are speaking, look at the camera. It's going to make people feel a lot more connected to you.
Yeah, and most people don't. I think that's just like it's something that you have to learn, because most people don't understand that that's really what's going on, because it's tough to, it's an in-person communication. Like if I'm looking at the camera, I'm actually looking at you, but I don't feel like I'm looking at you, and I can't really see like how you're reacting to the conversation without darting down and looking, into the corner or wherever it is. It's a tough thing.
It is. So thanks for mentioning that. If you're on Zoom or if you're on Microsoft Teams, any of the major video call platforms, there's actually a hack where you can kind of get the best of both worlds with that. So if you minimize your window, you can actually just drag it up to the top middle, right beside your camera. So when you minimize it, you basically just see a smaller little box of the person. Mm-hmm. So if you drag it up to the top of the screen, right beside your camera, you can look at that little box of the person. And because it's at the top of your screen, right beside your camera, it looks like you're still looking at your camera, and it looks like you're still making eye contact.
This is a great hack, because I have to tell you, this program, like I'm sitting here, like I just did it. So I'm not minimized. Like in front of me, there's a big picture of you and me, but there's a little box over here that has you and me too. And that's gotta be what that's for. Cause I just moved it up there, and now we're looking at each other again.
Perfect. Yeah. That's what I do on almost all of my calls. And it's a great way to still see the person. Yes, the person isn't massive, right? But you can still see their reactions. And it's really the only way to capitalize on both parts there, seeing them and making eye contact.
Yeah. So with your coaching, I mean, this is really neat to kind of see it kind of in action. But you said you don't do as much in person anymore. But when you do these classes, are you teaching people how to communicate in person and on video, or is it just kind of whatever their needs are?
Great question. Yeah, it's definitely a mix of both. It really depends on the person, what their needs are. So if they're doing primarily video calls at work, and work is their main focus, which, to be fair, most people do hire coaches for professional reasons. Right. Some might experience the benefits for their personal life, because a lot of the skills are transferable, right? It's not like you stop communicating when you leave work. But most people hire coaches to advance their careers, speak better at work, build their confidence, try to get a raise, try to get a promotion, lower their stress at work. Right. So, yes, it's person dependent, typically speaking, but the majority of the focus is on video calls, just because that's what most people do. I still love to teach the in-person stuff as well, but there's just not as much of that now.
Yeah. It's weird, because it just like we were talking about, they expose the fact that you don't have to do it. And so then they realize that they don't need to do it. And then I'm nervous about what's going to happen. I mean, we're not that old, and we're going to be in this space at some point where people aren't even going to talk to each other. Like, I love voice. Like, that's kind of my favorite thing. a friend of mine and I, we constantly all day long we're voicing back and forth on Signal, kind of like WhatsApp or whatever, where it's an audio thing. And just sitting there typing is just like, sometimes we have to go to text. I'm just like, oh, this is stupid. I don't want to do this because I don't get to actually, it's like having an extended conversation, but you can't have it when you're typing,
I'm with you on that. I definitely love a voice note. And if it's not a voice note, I will be voice to texting.
Yes.
Because I also find it just wildly inefficient compared to how fast I can speak, having to type. So yeah, I'm with you. I love the voice notes. I love the voice to text. Even sending videos, I'll do that sometimes as well. There's just much better ways. Not saying you have to do this all the time, but it's a nice way too, just to have a bit more of a personal connection with anyone you're talking to. And if you don't care about a personal connection, maybe because you're a cold monster, think about it as if you're saving time, because you can say a lot more just holding up your camera and speaking, or turning on your microphone and doing a voice note. You can save time. So there's something there for everyone.
Well, let's talk about, we're almost running out of time here, but let's talk about, I don't want to put a time constraint on you. We've got like 10 minutes. All right. So can you give us kind of a 10-minute rundown on maybe one of your favorite tools that you use to help people communicate better?
Yeah, happy to. One that comes to mind immediately, this aligns with what we were talking about before about speaking clearly and more concisely. So this is a framework that I teach that a lot of people love, just because it actually gives you a tangible way to organize your thoughts and ideas and make a point in a way that is not only easy for others to understand, but easy for you to explain. Okay, so what is it? So this is called the PREP framework. So PREP is an acronym. It stands for point, reason, evidence, point. Okay, so you should always be able to say your main point in one sentence. So the first P, your point, it should be one sentence. So for example, we're talking about communication. My point could be communication skills are incredibly powerful. Okay. 1 point, one sentence.
Right.
The R, which is reason, why do I think my point is true? So what's the reason that I think this point? If I just said communication is powerful, it's like, oh, sounds like Ty's just thrown out an opinion.
Right.
Why does he think this? So my reason could be communication skills help you get more respect and advance your career. So that's the reason. That's why I think it.
Yep.
The E, which is evidence, is basically, how do I know this to be true? So how do I support my point? Without this, if I say communication is powerful, helps you advance your career and get more respect, okay, great, but who is Ty to say this?
Yeah.
How do I know Ty knows anything about this? So we support it with some evidence. So this can be your personal experience, could be someone else's experience, it can be a stat, it can be a fact, it can be a quote, anything like that. A lot of times when we're just speaking, we're not going to have statistics and facts and data for a lot of the things that we say. So use your personal experience or someone that you know's personal experience to back up what you're saying. So I might say, I've coached hundreds of professionals and I've seen countless people advance their careers and get more respect by improving their communication. I might also throw out a stat because I happen to have one, given that it's what we do.
If you've got one.
And this is a cool one. So it's actually, according to Harvard and Stanford, 85% of your financial success for the average person is based on your communication skills. So now, okay, Ty has lots of personal experience, and there's this data from a reputable source that backs up why communication is powerful. So we set our point, we said why we think it, we gave some evidence to back it up, and then the final P of PREP is just restating your point. So it's just your point again. That's why communication is incredibly powerful. I can just say it again, literally the same words. That's totally fine. I could rephrase it a bit. I could say communication has a tremendous impact. Just something simple like this, just having a framework to stay within. Point, reason, evidence, and point. That has made so many people's lives a lot easier, and it's made it like a huge difference on their meetings, their presentations, any type of conversation. That's something that you can practice in almost every conversation.
Right.
Every time that you make a point.
It's amazing because that is, it's kind of like I don't know if you've ever heard of the criticism sandwich. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, okay, you did this well, you need to work on this, but like you sandwich it in there and like you get to the point, like you're telling them what it is, you're giving them evidence, and then boom, this is why. Again, same thing. So it's almost like a mind trick, right? Like you're really just like reinstating what you already said, and you're giving it's how a good conversation should be.
100%. And I'm big into these frameworks, structure, giving people tangible ways of communicating these things. Because even to your point about giving criticism, if you don't have something to organize your ideas or to structure what you're going to say, I mean, left to our own devices, we just kind of ramble on. We're talking about this. Our mind goes here,
right,
talking about that. And then we just stop when we think we should stop in that moment. But there's really no structure. And we're just kind of freestyling. And
right.
Some people are great freestylers. Most people are not.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things that like with the evidence, right? Like a lot of times when I am sharing something with someone or talking to someone or doing what I do, I always relate it to what I've been through and how I got there and how that worked for me, so that they understand that it's not just something that I'm just saying, it's something that I've experienced and I'm able to give you firsthand knowledge on what I did and how I perfected it.
That's absolutely perfect, because if you miss any of those steps and you're just throwing out points, or maybe you give a point and a reason, but there's nothing to really back it up, that's when you get people that in their minds they're thinking, okay, so what? Or I'm not sure about this. Yeah. How does Wes know this?
Right.
How does Ty know this?
Yeah.
So it's really important to definitely capitalize on each of those.
Yeah. Well, there's been I appreciate you taking the time. There's been a lot of good information here. And, I look forward to, kind of going through this more and getting to know you a little bit better. And maybe we'll have you back on and we'll talk about some more stuff. If anyone is interested in coaching, tell us about your book. Tell us about all the things you've got going on so people can find you.
Yeah, appreciate it, Wes. Easiest way to find me is on social media. I post every day across most of the major platforms. So Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok are the main ones. It's just my full name, Ty Hoesgen, which is Tyhoesgen. And I'm happy to give away a free training for anyone listening as well. It's actually on video calls, which we talked a bit about. It's how to instantly build trust, increase connection, and command respect on every video call. It's called 5 Science-Backed Video Call Secrets every professional needs to know. So that can be got for free at videocallstar.com. And lots of good feedback on that. It's a free resource a lot of people find helpful. Something that everyone needs. If you even do one video call a week, you should definitely pick this up, because I guarantee you're making some mistakes.
Right.
The book is on Amazon as well, Elite Communication Skills. If you type that into Amazon or on Audible, you will hear someone else's voice, as we mentioned for the Audible, but it's a great voice. It's a low voice. I'm sure you'll like it. And then if you prefer a real book, ebook, those are on Amazon as well.
Yeah, I know I definitely will be listening to it on Audible. So I'll let you know. I'll let you know about your selection.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I encourage anyone to fire me a quick message on social media. I'm a bit of a workaholic. I'm always on my phone, always doing stuff, always on my laptop. So I actually respond to messages too. I spend a little bit of time each day. reaching out and talking to my followers on there. So I encourage anyone to send a quick message, Instagram or LinkedIn. Tell us what the favorite part of the episode was, something that you learned. If you have any questions, I'm definitely happy to speak with anyone.
Well, awesome, Ty. Thank you for reaching out and getting this arranged. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to hear a little bit more of this conversation, you can come join the Patreon and you can get a little bit of behind the scenes conversation that we will have shortly here. So thanks again, Ty.
Thanks, Wes. Absolute pleasure.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much for hanging out with us with that awesome conversation. Communication is definitely a lost art that I feel like a lot of people are having trouble with. Luckily for me, I get to communicate with people every single day. I walk into their houses and I get to, talk to them. So I thoroughly enjoy having these conversations, and I hope that you are getting something out of them as well. Please join the Patreon. Like I said, help. The best way to help without having to spend a dime is to like, share, and review. Help us grow the show. Subscribe wherever you're watching. Until next time, I challenge you to find the shape of your success.